Story 1. The motel room that didn't exist the next morning. This happened to me in 2017, somewhere along Interstate 70, crossing through western Kansas. I was driving back from a visit to Colorado Springs. I'd just come off a 3-day solo trip. Nothing crazy, just needed to be alone for a bit. Around 11:40 p.m., I realized I was too exhausted to keep driving. It had started drizzling, and the highway lines were blending in with the road. There weren't many options, but I saw a sign, Vacancy, Red Pines Motel, next right. It looked like one of those older roadside motels, the kind that's been there since the 60s and has never seen a renovation. The gravel driveway curved behind a line of half-dead hedges, and the neon sign buzzed weakly, throwing off a pinkish glow. There was no front desk inside, just a sliding window. I pressed the bell. A man in a collared shirt and thick glasses opened the window without saying anything. He looked about 70. "Just one night," I said. He nodded, handed me a key on a plastic tag. "Room 6. No paperwork, no ID. I asked if they took cards. He said, "Cash only." I paid $35. He gave me a receipt printed from one of those old carbon copy pads. That was the first odd thing. No logo, no phone number. Just Red Pines Motel Room 6, $35, paid 9/12/1992. I didn't notice the year until later. I pulled my car up to the room. There were no other cars in the lot. Everything around me was silent except the buzzing neon. Room 6 was halfway down the strip between two unlit units. The key turned easily. Inside, it smelled like a basement, like wet paper and rusted metal. The carpet was a dull burgundy, the kind you'd expect in an old church. The lamp by the bed had a yellowed, pleated shade, and the wallpaper was peeling slightly near the corners, floral with a faded pink. It felt too preserved. Not clean exactly, just untouched. Everything was old but functional. A rotary phone on the nightstand, a box TV with no remote, a dresser with water-stained doilies, and a Gideon Bible inside the drawer. The AC unit under the window had knobs that clicked softly as I turned them. Cold air drifted out slowly, but it worked. I noticed something strange while unpacking. There was a framed photo above the bed. It was of a field, just dry grass under a grey sky, but it wasn't printed or painted. It looked like someone had taken it from a magazine and slipped it under glass. The frame itself had dust behind the glass. I turned on the lamp and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress barely dipped under my weight, like no one had ever used it. The quiet was thick, not peaceful, more like padded. I didn't fall asleep right away. The silence made me feel like I was being listened to, not watched, listened to. Every time I shifted, the springs inside the mattress creaked just a little, and the sound seemed to hang in the air too long. I got up to check the curtains. They were shut tight. I peeked outside. Still no other cars, not even the one at the office. I started to feel, not scared, but aware. The room didn't feel like a room I was renting. It felt like a place I wasn't supposed to be in. A display. I went into the bathroom. Same vibe. The mirror was too clean. The towels were folded too precisely, almost crisp. There were no signs of wear, no frayed edges, no stains. The bar of soap was wrapped in plastic, but the wrapper had turned brittle. It cracked like dead leaves when I opened it. I brushed my teeth, tried not to look too long in the mirror. When I got into bed, I left the lamp on. Something about the darkness in that room felt wrong. Like it wouldn't be empty if I turned off the light. I didn't sleep well, kept waking up to silence. Not sounds, silence, thick and unnatural, like a room sealed off from the world. The next morning, the light outside was pale grey, almost white. I opened the curtain and stared out at the lot. My car was there, but the office, gone. I got dressed quickly and stepped outside. The gravel felt different. Softer, almost like it hadn't been driven on in years. The air smelled stale. The office where I'd checked in wasn't there, just an old wooden door nailed shut and covered in faded boards. No sign, no bell, no window. I stood there holding the room key in my hand. Room 6. I looked down the row of rooms. All the doors were shut, the curtains drawn. I tried knocking on the room next to mine. No answer. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. Back inside, I grabbed my bag and checked out the receipt again. Room 6. Paid. 9/12/1992. The date felt like a mistake. I pulled out my phone. Full bars. Google Maps showed no listing for Red Pines Motel. I tried searching nearby places. Nothing came up for miles. When I typed in Red Pines, it gave me a nature preserve 40 minutes away. I took the receipt outside. I wanted to show someone, but there was no one there. I drove into the nearest gas station, maybe 25 minutes east. It was a real place. Modern, people inside, music playing. I asked the cashier if she'd heard of a Red Pines Motel back up the road. She frowned and asked how far back. I said, just before exit 214, gravel driveway, neon sign. She shook her head. That place burned down in the 90s. I didn't say anything for a second. Are you sure? She nodded. Yeah, my uncle was a firefighter back then. Said it was a total loss. Electrical fire. They never rebuilt it. I asked if she was sure it was the same name. She said, yeah, Red Pines, with a pink sign. I went back to my car and checked the glove box. The receipt was still there. I haven't shown it to anyone else. I keep it in a book at home now. The carbon copy ink has faded, but you can still make out the date. It's been years since it happened, but I've started noticing stories that echo mine. I joined a few forums, mostly ones for solo travelers and night drivers. I didn't post anything at first, just read. One thread in particular stuck with me. A guy wrote about stopping at a motel in Utah during a snowstorm. He described it in similar detail: outdated interiors, a faint chemical smell, silence that seemed wrong. He said when he came back with his girlfriend 2 weeks later, the lot was empty, just a clearing with a rusted signpost. Someone else in the thread replied that these places have names: phantom shelters, temporary structures that appear only in certain conditions, usually exhaustion, sometimes bad weather, sometimes both. The term temporal dislocation came up. They weren't saying it was time travel exactly. More like the mind registers an impossible place as real, and for a moment it is. One user said he stopped at a diner during a thunderstorm. He ordered coffee, paid in cash, got a receipt with no date, just the word Clearview. When he went back a few days later, there was only an empty lot. He remembered the waitress's name, Luann, and when he Googled it, he found an obituary. She died in 1995. These stories didn't feel fake. They weren't written like creepypasta. They read like quiet confessions. No big twist, no monster, just a place that shouldn't have been there. There was one that hit me hardest. A couple had driven through the Midwest and stopped at a roadside inn when their car overheated. The man remembered the walls being too thin. The woman said she saw someone standing in the mirror, not behind her, in it. When they went back later to see the place again, they found a single metal pole stuck in the ground where the building had been, rusted. On the base, someone had scratched the outline of a car, their exact model, down to the broken passenger mirror. That's what stopped me. I went back to Kansas a few months ago, not for closure, just I wanted to see it in daylight. The stretch of highway looked the same. I drove slowly near exit 214. Nothing, but I did see a pole. Maybe 4 feet tall, right before the tree line. It had been painted recently. Bright red. Fresh bolts on the side. No motel, no gravel drive. Just weeds and silence. I got out and walked over to the pole. Etched into the steel, not scratched but pressed like with a heavy nail, was the shape of a sedan. Mine. And beneath it, room 6. I don't know what it means. I don't stay at motels anymore. And when I drive, I don't stop after dark, not even for gas. Story 2. He kept flashing his high beams, but there was no one behind me. This happened in the summer of 2021. I was driving through rural Pennsylvania on my way back to Cleveland. It was a Sunday night, about 11:30 p.m., and I was behind schedule. I had left later than planned and decided to cut through a series of back roads instead of taking the longer highway route. The route was quiet. Forested shoulders, no streetlights, just old reflective signs and tree silhouettes on both sides. I was maybe an hour outside of a town called Brookville when I first noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. At first I assumed it was just another late-night driver. The lights were low and steady. I figured they were keeping a safe distance, probably cautious like me. The road wasn't wide, and there were occasional sharp turns that came out of nowhere. I didn't think anything of it until I rounded a curve and they disappeared. Not faded, just gone. There was no turnoff. I kept driving. 5 minutes later, they reappeared. No engine noise, just the sudden bloom of high beams in my rearview. Then they dimmed again. That got my attention. I checked my speed, thinking maybe they were warning me about something. But I wasn't speeding, and I hadn't passed any hazards. Then the beams flashed again, 3 times. I slowed down, looking for a place to pull over, thinking maybe something was wrong with my car, a brake light out, or maybe my back hatch had come open. I rolled down my window and listened. Nothing. I pulled over at a shoulder where the trees cleared slightly. The headlights were gone again. No car, no sound. I stepped out and walked a few feet behind the car. My taillights were fine. Trunk was shut. Tires looked okay. I left the engine running and stood there for a second, looking back at the road I'd just come from. Empty. I got back in the car, locked the doors, kept driving. It didn't take long before the lights returned. Same distance, same pattern. Bright, then dark, then 3 short flashes. It felt deliberate. Not aggressive, not impatient. More like they were answering something, or signaling, but I hadn't done anything to provoke a response. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Maybe their brights were malfunctioning. Maybe it was a faulty sensor, or they were trying to mess with me. I flicked my rear fog lights on. They didn't react. Then, just as I passed a field of unplanted corn, long flat soil under the moonlight, the lights turned off completely. No trailing glow, no red from brake lights, just gone. Again. I slowed the car to a near stop, craning my neck to see if they'd pulled off into a ditch. Nothing. The road stretched behind me like a black ribbon, totally empty. But I didn't feel alone. I drove faster. About 5 minutes later, I crested a small hill and saw them again. Headlights, same brightness, same distance. I hadn't taken a turn. I hadn't looped around. But they were behind me again, exactly as before. This time they didn't flash. They just stayed close, too close. I could make out the distinct shape of the beams now. They were high-mounted, like a truck, but thinner, cleaner, almost surgical in how perfectly the light hit my mirrors. Not blinding, just constant. After about a minute, the lights blinked once, then again, then stayed off. I waited for the engine sound to catch up, but there was nothing, just the wind through the vents and the crunch of my tires on old asphalt. I passed a road sign for Thompson Trail and made a note of it, figuring if I needed to explain this later, I should remember where I was. But then something started bothering me. I'd passed that road sign already, I was sure of it. I hadn't taken any turns. I was following the GPS exactly, one long stretch through a rural corridor with almost no intersections. But as I passed the next reflective post on the right, I saw it clearly, mile marker 238. It stuck out because it had a red spray-painted triangle on it, bright red upside down with a short line beneath it like a broken exclamation mark. I kept going. 10 minutes passed, no turns, no changes in the road. Then I passed it again. Mile marker 238. Red triangle, same shape, same angle. At that point, I pulled out my phone. The GPS hadn't recalculated. It still showed a straight line, no detours. ETA unchanged. I tapped the screen. Nothing had loaded. No road name, no alternate route. Just the blue line. I zoomed in. Nothing. No gas stations, no driveways, no exits. I turned off the audio directions and rolled the window down, trying to clear my head. The night air was warm and carried that thick, grassy scent you only smell in fields after dark. The moon was still bright, full or close to it, and it made the road glow slightly. And then I passed it again, mile marker 238. Same graffiti, not just similar, identical. Even the chipped paint on the post was in the same place, same angle, same color fading. I took my foot off the gas, coasted for a moment. My eyes flicked to the rear view. No lights, not even distant ones. That was somehow worse than if they'd still been there. I said out loud, "What the hell is going on?" It felt stupid to speak, like I was confirming something I wasn't ready to accept. I passed a sign that said Clear Run Cemetery, 2 miles ahead. 2 minutes later, the same sign. Same tilt. Same bullet hole through the word cemetery. I slammed the brakes, pulled over. This wasn't a loop, not exactly. My gas gauge had dropped. The moon had shifted slightly. Time was still passing, but the road was not. I stepped out, just to feel solid ground. The silence was unreal. No insects, no leaves moving, just the soft hum of my engine. And then I saw it. In the distance behind me, a flicker of high beams, 3 flashes, then dark. I got back in the car and drove. I must have driven another 40 minutes. The road didn't change. Same curve, same leaning fence, same cemetery sign, same mile marker. I turned off my phone screen and left it on the passenger seat. At that point, I didn't trust the GPS. It hadn't updated since the first mile marker loop. I reached for the glove box, pulled out an old paper atlas I kept for emergencies. I flipped to Pennsylvania, found Route 28, traced it with my finger. There was no Thompson Trail. There was no Clear Run Cemetery. I wasn't on 28 anymore, at least not a version that existed on paper. I slowed the car again and tried to focus. I wanted to stop, just to gather my thoughts. But the idea of pulling over now felt dangerous. Not unsafe, dangerous, like if I stopped moving, something would catch up. Eventually, I saw something new, a wooden sign, half buried in overgrowth. I slowed as I passed it. The sign had no words, just 3 carved lines in the shape of a slanted Z. And leaning against it, barely visible in the shadows, was a road cone with a fresh smear of black paint across it. I finally stopped, shifted the car into park, turned off the ignition. It was dead silent. I opened the map again, holding it under the dome light. The creases had worn thin, and I realized my hands were trembling. I stared at the spot I should be on, no way to cross-reference. Then I noticed something. On my dashboard, just above the speedometer, was a yellow, sticky note. I hadn't put it there. I stared at it for a full minute before touching it. The handwriting was tiny, printed in neat block letters. Stay in your lane. No punctuation, no smudges, just those words. I pulled it off carefully, checked the back. Blank. I turned the car back on and turned around, against every instinct telling me not to. Nothing changed. Same road, same signs. But eventually, after what felt like another hour, I saw a small green sign. Welcome to Westmoreland County. And then a gas station, real, lit, with cars. I pulled in and sat there for 10 minutes before going inside. I asked the clerk if he knew anything about Route 28 and mile marker 238. He looked at me blankly. He said, "There is no mile marker 238, not around here. That's hundreds of miles west." I nodded. Bought a water, left. The sticky note is still in my glove box. I don't drive at night anymore, not through back roads, and I never flash my high beams, not even once. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 3. We picked up a hitchhiker and none of us remember letting him out. This happened in October 2018. I remember the month because we were driving home from a music festival in Tennessee, just outside Chattanooga. There were 4 of us in the car. Me, Sam, Jordan and Lacey, all in our 20s, all exhausted from 3 straight days of camping, drinking and barely sleeping. We'd planned to drive halfway home Sunday night and crash at a cheap motel in Kentucky. Sam was driving the first leg and I was in the passenger seat. It was sometime after midnight when we saw him, a hitchhiker, standing just off the shoulder, one thumb out, the other hand hanging at his side. I remember his posture, not desperate, not hopeful, just still, like he knew someone would stop. And Sam did. He pulled over without even saying anything. I remember being surprised. None of us were the type to pick up strangers, especially not at night in the middle of nowhere. But he slowed, rolled the window down and said, "You need a lift." The guy nodded. He looked young, late 20s maybe, jeans, a jacket, though I can't remember the color. That part's fuzzy for all of us. Jordan swears it was green. Lacey says it was black. I thought it was denim. He climbed in behind me so I couldn't see him clearly. We kept driving. That's where the details start to unravel. We talked. I know that. We all agree he spoke, but none of us can remember what he said. Not one line, not even the sound of his voice. Jordan says he had a southern accent. Sam says no, he sounded almost British. Lacey said he didn't speak until an hour in. I remember him talking as soon as he got in. When we tried piecing it together the next day, it felt like 4 people describing 4 different passengers. One said he laughed. One said he didn't smile. One said he asked about the music. One swore he sat silently with his head down the whole ride. We were only in the car with him for maybe an hour. No one saw him get out. None of us remember saying goodbye. There was no stop, no dropped-off location. At some point, he just wasn't there. I turned around to say something, and the back seat was empty. I thought he must have fallen asleep and leaned over. I checked again, gone. Sam pulled over. We searched the car, checked the floor, even though there was nowhere to hide. We were shaken, but still tried to stay rational. Maybe we had stopped without thinking. Maybe he asked to be dropped off and we just forgot. That didn't explain why none of us could remember opening the door, or why we all had different memories of his face, or why every photo from that night, inside the car, had a gap in the back seat where he sat, like something had been there, but never left a shape. A couple days after the trip, I was driving alone to work and thinking about it again. The hitchhiker. How weird it had been that none of us remembered the exact moment he left. It was the kind of thing you talk yourself out of when you're tired, but I couldn't. So I pulled over at a gas station, filled up, and sat in the car for a minute, engine running, just watching the back seat through the rear view. That's when I saw it. A jacket, folded neatly, on the passenger side seat in the back. I turned around to grab it. The seat was empty. I looked back at the mirror. The jacket was still there. I turned again. Nothing. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for my phone, turned the front-facing camera on, held it up over my shoulder and angled it toward the back seat. The screen showed nothing, just empty cloth. I flipped the phone around, used the rear camera, still nothing. But in the rear view, clear as day, a jacket, folded, a slight shimmer in the light, like waxed fabric. I sat there for 15 minutes, trying to will it to disappear. It didn't. Eventually, I drove to work. Every time I glanced up, it was still there. At the next red light, I took my eyes off it, just for a second. When I looked again, the seat was empty, even in the mirror. I didn't mention it to anyone until the following weekend when we all met up again. I told them what I'd seen. Jordan went quiet. Then he said, "That's messed up." He opened his phone and pulled up a picture he'd taken during the drive. It was from the passenger seat, me asleep, Lacey laughing in the back. He zoomed in on the far right corner. There was something blurry on the seat, folded, almost like fabric. "I thought it was a shadow," he said. "But look." We passed his phone around. The shape didn't look natural. It had creases, lines, a collar. But it wasn't clear enough to confirm. Still, none of us could explain it, and none of us had brought a jacket like that. Over the next few weeks, all of us had little moments, glimpses in reflections. Faint weight shifts in the back seat when we drove alone. The seatbelt on the far side buckled one morning, even though I hadn't had any passengers for days. But the worst part was the scent. At first, it was faint, like damp wool. Then it became stronger. I had my car cleaned, twice, shampooed everything. It didn't help. The smell always came back after dark, only in the mirror. I started researching, not on regular sites, but forums. Deep, quiet places on the web where people post under usernames like Static Blind and Echo Trace. I found a thread called Phantom Riders. Some of it was just urban legend, ghosts, myths, that kind of thing, but a few stories mirrored ours too closely to ignore. A couple picked up a man walking along a foggy stretch of highway. He never spoke. When they arrived in town, he was gone. The woman started hearing footsteps in the back seat weeks later. The man began repeating phrases he didn't remember learning. Another post described a driver who picked up a woman hitchhiking in Texas, said she was polite, quiet. When she left, he found one of his own photos in the back seat, one he didn't remember taking. The caption was written in his handwriting. It said, "I told you I was here." What disturbed me most were the reports of behavioral bleed. The idea that these passengers don't just vanish, they leave something behind, not physical, but mental. Sam, the one who picked him up, started acting different. Subtle at first, using phrases we'd never heard him say. Saying things like, "shouldn't be long now," when no one asked for a time. He started sleeping less. He admitted to having dreams where he was the one in the back seat, riding along in someone else's car, unable to speak. Lacey began to feel like she'd had conversations she couldn't recall. She'd say things like, "You remember what he said about the bridge?" And we'd all go silent because none of us had talked about any bridge. Jordan started showing up late to everything. Not 5 or 10 minutes. An hour. Always an hour. He said he couldn't explain it. He'd leave at 3:00 p.m. for a place 15 minutes away and arrive at 4:10. Every clock, every app, every GPS told him it was his fault. But he knew he wasn't stopping. He was losing time. It became a joke at first, phantom passenger tax. But it stopped being funny when Jordan called one night and asked if I remembered him telling me something that I didn't. He said, "You don't remember me saying I saw him again?" I said, "What?" He swore he'd told me, swore I'd replied. Then he paused. "Or maybe it was you who said it." That's when I knew something was wrong. Really wrong. Because I had seen someone. Not recently. But in my rear view, weeks after the trip, I'd glanced up while driving past a bridge and seen a shape in the mirror, middle seat, wearing a jacket. I never looked again. I just drove. Now, every so often, my seatbelt clicks tight while I'm driving. Just once. Just enough to feel the pull. None of us remember letting him out. Maybe he never needed to get out. Maybe he just needed a way in.